Hi, welcome to Cooking from the Classics. I'm Deanna from Pisan Academy, and this is a show where we create recipes from classic literature. And they could be recipes that characters are talking about, or food that is just mentioned in the novel. Today's novel is from the late 1800s. It's a novel by Stephen Crane, The Red Badge of Courage. Now, this is a story about Henry Fleming, who is a young man who joins the Union Army because he has these idealistic views of what it would be like to serve in war and be a hero. But when he gets there, he realizes that there's a lot of waiting around.
War was simply a matter of waiting and endless drilling.
He finally gets to his first battle, and he's absolutely terrified, and so he runs away.
What's the matter, Henry? You scared?
Scared? Me? Of course not. What a dumb fool question.
The rest of the novel is his slow redemption back from that, and it's a very heroic novel and just wonderfully written. So within that novel, there's a mention of pea soup.
All I want some pea soup, a good bed, some pea soup, that's all.
And that's the recipe that we're going to be making today. Now, I'm using the recipe that my mother taught me because in the novel there's this idea of that the soup represents comfort and home. And my mom's pea soup, in my memory, still represents comfort and home. But as we go through the ingredients, I'll talk about some variations that you can do. I'm using a pretty traditional recipe. So let's get started. I've already prepped the ingredients, but I'm going to go through them so you can see what we're going to be cooking with as we go through the different steps. This is a one-pot meal, so it's not too difficult to create, and this would be a really nice thing to do in the afternoon. You can read the novel, you can have your teen or your middle schooler read the novel, and then you can maybe talk about the Civil War and then create the recipe. So it's a very immersive experience to cook from the books. The first ingredient is about a tablespoon of olive oil, about a clove of garlic. If the garlic is a little bit smaller, then you'll want to add 2 smaller cloves of garlic, 2 bay leaves, some fresh parsley, and you can use either fresh or dried thyme. And the thyme, if it's fresh, should be about 1.5 teaspoons, and if it's dried, about 1/2 teaspoon. I like carrots, so I'm doing a lot of carrots, about 2 cups. 1/2 to 3/4 cup celery, and then about 1 cup of chopped onions. I'm also including a ham hock, and ham hock you can get at your local grocery store, and it's just a smoked ham shank, and it still has some of the ham on it, and that's going to fall apart when you cook the soup and add a really nice flavor. I'm also including about 2.5 cups of chicken stock and then about 2 cups of water. If I need more liquid, I can add to it, but this is where I start. And I like to use half chicken stock and half water because I think the peas and the ham have really nice flavor, and the chicken stock can be overpowering because it's a little more subtle in this particular soup. So I think the water is a good idea. And then the split peas. Now I soak my peas overnight, which means that you just put the dried peas in a bowl, cover them with water a little bit more than just over the top, and then place plastic wrap over it and stick it in the fridge overnight. Now you don't have to soak peas. You should soak legumes. Typically, if you're doing beans like pinto beans, you should soak them overnight. But I like to soak all of my legumes, so I've already pre-soaked these. It also helps cook the soup a little bit faster because they've already absorbed some water. And those are the ingredients. So let's head over to the stove and we will start cooking. Okay, so we're over on the cooktop, and I'm using a small stock pot. Now, when I was growing up, my mom would make tons of pea soup. She would triple or quadruple the recipe so she could freeze or can it. But we're just doing one recipe today, and so a smaller stock pot is all you're going to need, or a Dutch oven, something like that. And what we're going to be doing is layering flavors. So we're going to put our burner onto medium heat. And then we're going to start with our olive oil, and we don't want that to heat up too much, but we just want to get it a little bit warm. And then we're going to move on to our onions, And we're going to add these and cook them until they're translucent, usually about a minute or two, but you do want to keep an eye on them because you don't want to brown the onions. You just want to get them a little bit cooked. And again, this is the concept of layering flavors. So we'll pour those in. And we're just going to saute those for a little bit in the oil. Again, it should take about 1 to 2 minutes for the onions to cook. So the onions are ready, they're translucent, and now we're going to add the garlic. And again, you don't want to overcook the garlic, you just want to get that flavor to come out with those onions. So about a minute total. So the garlic has been sauteing a little bit, and now we're going to add our celery to layer in that flavor. And you just want to saute like a minute for each different ingredient that you are putting in. And next will be our carrots. Okay, and then the carrots will go in, and this is the last ingredient we're going to saute. And you'll just stir those up with the other veg, again, for about a minute. Okay, so you just want to make sure that all those flavors are mixed in together. And the next stage is to add your liquid. So we'll add our water. And then we're going to add our chicken stock. And now it is time to add our peas to our pea soup. And this is how we're going to measure our liquid when we get all of our ingredients in. If we need some more to cover everything up completely, but you don't want to put too much liquid in, otherwise you're going to have a pretty runny pea soup. Okay, so we'll just stir those in. And right now the liquid's looking pretty good, but we still have to add in that ham hock. I'm going to put in the 2 bay leaves, so just drop those in. And when the soup is done, you're going to be removing those bay leaves before you serve it. And then I'm going to add in my sprigs of thyme. And because I'm using fresh thyme from the garden, I have to just take it off of the stems. So you just run your fingers opposite the way it grows, and all of the thyme will go in the pot. So just like that. And it should be about 1.5 teaspoons. The nice thing with soups is that, you know, the measurements don't have to be exact. You need to get it close, but you don't have to be exact on everything. And a lot of it's just about, you know, flavoring, and depending on how comfortable you are in the kitchen, you can experiment with different things. So I'm using a ham hock, but there are some people that don't eat ham, and so you can omit that. Or if you want to add vegetable stock instead of chicken stock, you can definitely do that. I was vegetarian for a long time and I still made pea soup. I just didn't have a ham hock and I used vegetable stock, and it was still very, very good. You can also get creative with the vegetables that you add to it. I've added things like I would put asparagus, chop it up really fine and put it in there. So you can do interesting things with different flavor profiles with pea soup. You don't have to be as traditional as we are being today. But because in the novel, the scene where they mention pea soup, the soldier who's on the battlefield and is wounded and he's remembering home and the comfort of home, I thought that my comfort would be to make my mom's recipe. So that's what I'm sharing with you today. So we're just going to stir in our spices. And we actually want to turn our burner up a little bit. We want to like pretty much bring it almost to a boil. Then we're gonna just let it like right underneath a boil, sit for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we're gonna turn it down to a simmer. But first, let's add that ham hock, and then we can see our liquid. So here's our ham hock, and again, you can just pick this up at the butcher. They're already pre-smoked, so they're pre-cooked. And what's going to happen in the soup is that that ham will start to cook down and break off that bone. And before you serve it, you'll remove those bay leaves and the bone, the ham bone. And then there'll be bits of ham that have kind of shredded apart. So you do need to make sure that you cook this long enough. Now I'm going to leave the lid off for this initial part, but then I'm going to let it simmer, and I'm going to put the lid back on because I like the amount of liquid that's in here now. But I will keep an eye on it. If it starts to look too thick, I can always add in a little bit of chicken stock. Another thing you're going to do is salt and pepper to taste. For all of the soups that I make, I always do this initial cooking on a little higher heat, and then before I bring it to a simmer, I'm going to salt and pepper. I think there are different ways of doing it, but I was taught to cook by my mom, so I cook like my mom, and that's something that she also did. So we're just going to keep an eye on this, and we'll check back in on it in a few minutes and see how it's doing. Okay, so I'm checking on the soup, and I'm noticing that it's getting, the liquid is getting absorbed quite a bit by the peas and the vegetables, and so I'm going to add some more stock. Otherwise, our soup's going to be way too thick. So what I have here is a half a cup of water, and then I'm going to add a half a cup of stock with it. So I have 1 cup liquid, and I usually add 1 cup at a time. And again, I like to mix half and half stock and water so the flavor of the peas and the ham hock really come out. And let me stir that in. And what I'm looking for is I want like this ham bone, which is touching the bottom, and all of the vegetables and the peas. Now the peas are going to keep absorbing that water. So I want it to be about 1 inch above that ham bone, and it's not quite. So I'm going to add just a little bit more stock, probably about a half a cup. And then I'm going to turn the burner down so it simmers. I'm going to cover it because I don't want all that liquid to boil off because I am adding water. So we'll turn it down, and then we're just going to let it cook, and I will come back and check the status of everything about every 30 minutes. I have cooked this on the stove up to 4 or 5 hours on low. It just depends on how long it takes for that ham and the peas to break down. And you know, everyone is different on how they like it, but I like that ham to be really kind of shredding and really falling off the bone. So I tend to cook the pea soup a little bit maybe on the long side, but that's just preference. And so it should be thick and not runny. So, but you do need to watch that liquid level. So I just keep the stock next to the pot and then keep adding liquid and stock as needed. Okay, so our pea soup is done. It's been cooking for quite a while, but you can see the carrots are soft and the ham is falling off the bone a little bit. So we're gonna take out the bone and the bay leaves, and then it'll be ready to try. So I have some tongs, so we will first get that ham hock bone out of there. And then you do have to fish around for the bay leaves a little bit sometimes. As I do that, you can see that the ham has fallen off the bone, which will be a nice flavor. Okay, there's 1 bay leaf. And there's an old wives' tale that whoever gets the bay leaves doesn't have to do dishes, which is what my mom would always say, because she was notorious for leaving the bay leaves in her cooking. So I don't know if she just made that up or if it is something that is a saying. So here's our second bay leaf, and all accounted for. And I'm just going to put this in the sink, and we're ready to try our soup. And so as I dish it up here, you'll see there's a lot of carrots because I always add a little extra carrots, and you'll see a few pieces of ham that is in there too. And it should be a nice green color and not too thick and not too runny. That is really good. Takes me back to being at the dining room table with my mom and my sister when I was a lot younger. I can see why that soldier was longing for a pea soup on the battlefield. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Cooking from the Classics. We like to bring ideas to parents where you can really immerse your children and even yourself in the works of literature that you're reading. Make sure that you check out the link below in the description. I'm going to include my mom's pea soup recipe there. And we'll see you next time on Cooking from the Classics.